What's going on, folks? Welcome back into another episode of the Johnnies Report. It is a little after 10, so I apologize to everyone for keeping you a little bit as St. John's tonight. Wow, maybe the grittiest win of the season, a 65-60 win over the Seton Hall Pirates, a Seton Hall Pirates team that really needed a victory, a quad one victory tonight. And at first, I'll be the first one to tell you, Seton Hall played like the team that was desperate for a W. St. John's to start struggling would be an understatement. St. John's, I guess if you're obviously going to be Mr. Positive, you'd like to say, hey, you know what? If you're going to struggle in one half, you'd rather struggle in the first half. I would still push back on anyone who says that and say, yeah, but you ideally would still like to be a little bit better than St. John's was offensively in the first half, just 11 of 26 from the field, 1 of 4 from three-point land, 6 turnovers, 14 rebounds. And you look at Seton Hall in the first half, they had 22 rebounds. They were the tougher team. They had only 5 turnovers. They were 4 of 6 from beyond. Oddly enough, they only had 3 points off turnovers in the first half, which I found a little weird, but their bench was getting it done. They had 18 points off the bench in that first half compared to St. John's, who was only in the single digits with 7. And really where Seton Hall made its headway was they defended in the paint really well. I mean, they were active. They were turning St. John's over. St. John's just could not find anywhere to set up in the paint. They were collapsing on St. John's inside. Zuby, Bryce, they had nowhere to go. The only guy that did much of anything was Dillon Mitchell, and he had 10 points and 3 rebounds. And as we look back on the game itself, Dillon Mitchell played the biggest role in this game, no question, for St. John's, in the fact that he was your leading scorer with 17 points, and he came up big on the glass. Now, mind you, it wasn't a sexy scoring night, I guess, for lack of better terms, for Dillon Mitchell. He does have his limitations. Not an outside shooter. Can't really shoot in the mid-range. As I've said it before, he's essentially Kadari Richmond, but, doesn't have the assist numbers to go along with it and isn't as skilled as a Kadari Richmond. But on the defensive end, on the glass, he's every bit as talented and has played a huge role for St. John's. And I said one of the best things Rick Pitino has done all year is increase his playing time. The importance of Ruben Prey, which proved once again here tonight, because Ruben Prey, you needed to bring him in because of the fact that Zuby was in some foul trouble, had the technical foul early. We'll get to that in a second. But Ruben Prey comes in and was big time on the defensive end. Gave St. John's a lift in the rebound category in the second half, where St. John's had 27 rebounds to Seton Hall's 19 in that second half, which again played a huge role in the win. But we got a little look at what you come to expect from Big East basketball, and especially with the namesakes of the Big East. And you have this rivalry tonight between St. John's and Seton Hall, which, by the way, I thought the 11.5 point spread, I'm not going to sit here and say, I don't see a reason as to why you wouldn't give an 11.5 point spread. I can see the reason behind it, but we've seen it all throughout this past week. As soon as conference play has started, not just in the Big East, all throughout the country, you're seeing a lot of teams in the top 25 that are heavily favored. They end up struggling. they ended up struggling in those games. You know, some upsets, some really, really rough plays from the team that was favored, and just some unpredictability that is college basketball. And that's why in the preview show, I said St. John's 75-70 over Seton Hall. It just so happened that it was 10 less points for each team. Now, when we look at this game, and you kind of, if you were to show a clip to anyone as to, like what was a key moment or anything like that, you'd have to go back to the technical fouls early in that one with Fisher and Zuby. A situation that, again, I mean, it held ball underneath. I'm not sure exactly when Zuby got hit. If, the replay, I don't think I ever really got to take a good look because Zuby was obviously bleeding on his lip. You could see blood on his teeth. And that obviously led to the two of them fighting for the ball, taking it from the baseline all the way to half court. And it was, again, something that you come to expect out of a Big East Classic and between two rivals in St. John's and Seton Hall that, by the way, gave you a classic in terms of a conference game, in terms of a game that had a lot of rough and tumble and stuff that was, really fun to watch. But again, Seton Hall in the first half was just outplaying St. John's. The will to win was favoring the Pirates. The Pirates, whose net ranking has taken a hit, they're out of the top 25 ranking. And I was just sitting there saying to myself, man, it just looks like Seton Hall, you never want to use this phrase, but just feels like they've wanted it more tonight. They're playing like the team with something to lose. They were aggressive defensively. And then the start of the second half comes, and St. John's doesn't have a bucket for the first 4 minutes in, about 41 or 4 minutes and 21 seconds before Bryce Hopkins cut a 15-point lead to a 13-point lead. And then Seton Hall continued to go on this scoring drought, and Isaiah Sellers hits a big three to get it to a 10-point game. And then you start to feel a little juice. You start to feel a little life. St. John's goes on a pretty sizable, I wouldn't say a sizable run here, but they were able to cut it to a 5-point game, going on a 6-2 run, which would then balloon for St. John's as the second half continued into what was about a double-digit point run for St. John's. And I just got to tell you, I mean, it's, again, one of those things that St. John's just does very well, is they are able to get stops. They are able to suffocate defensively and go on some long runs that puts them well ahead, which is, again, something that St. John's does very, very well. And Seton Hall, I mean, couldn't buy a bucket is probably the way that I would put it. A lot of opportunities for Seton Hall underneath. It was kind of a mix of, hey, St. John's did do some really good things defensively, but, man, there was some bad basketball by Seton Hall tonight on the offensive end, which is something that you expect out of the Pirates. This is a defensive first team. It's something that Rick Pitino even highlighted in the postgame. He said, Seton Hall is a tough-ass team to play against, and we had to pull a Seton Hall to win this game, giving a lot of credit to the Pirates, but also showing you again that, if you're going to win games ugly, like St. John's did tonight, and have to pull it out when you don't have your best night shooting-wise, which we'll get to those numbers in a second, you're going to need to be able to get gritty, and that's what St. John's was this evening. But you look at the three-point percentage in this game, it wasn't great. Again, it was something that we've come to see of this and unfortunately have come to see of this St. John's team under Rick Pitino. In the game as a whole, St. John's just 2 of 12 from beyond. Seton Hall was 5 of 13. Now, St. John's wasn't able to even gather any good open looks. Josan Sannon had 2 pretty good looks there, I thought, in the second half, and couldn't bury them. Had a mid-range look there in the second half, couldn't knock it down. Now, he had some nice layups, had some nice floaters, but his three-point shooting has never throughout this season gotten better. I'm not exactly sure why. I think part of the problem is they're just not trying to gear to him to get any really good looks. But it just feels like, is it ever going to come for this guy? Is it ever going to click? It clicked the other night, 2 big threes against Villanova. But tonight at home, in a situation where you really need a three-pointer to go down, he couldn't get it. So, again, just kind of some worrisome there from him. And then as you look at the second half scoring, Seton Hall just 7 of 25 from the field in that second half. St. John's just 3 shots better, 10 of 33. St. John's, you can't even, you look at the free throw line, they were 12 of 18. They were better than Seton Hall, who was just 7 of 14. But it wasn't a free throw shooting sway that widely favored St. John's, in which they got trips and trips and trips to the line. You look at it more as, man, if Seton Hall is able to make 5 more free throws, the opportunities they did get, especially late, we're looking at a game that would have been decided in overtime. And the last couple possessions there, St. John's, my goodness, Ubi, Dillon had a chance to ice the game. They couldn't at the free throw line. Ended up obviously being a much closer game than you would have liked, obviously, and given Seton Hall a couple extra opportunities. But regardless, St. John's wasn't like they did anything, flipped a switch offensively. It was just, man, Seton Hall, such a long scoring drought, 7 of 25 from the field in that second half. One guy that you really have to praise, though, we look at the Dillons here tonight, and with the game not decided yet, 58-61, St. John's just taking the 3-point lead late. You kind of had that feeling, man, you need a big stop or just, some type of a stop after Zuby made the second free throw to put them up 9. It was 59-56. And then Bud Clark's bringing it up the floor. Bud Clark, who really had a rough night scoring. And Dylan Darling comes right in at midcourt, pokes it away, goes down, makes the layup, 5-point game, about a minute to go, and that pretty much sealed it. Plays that for years would go against St. John's. St. John's made it happen. And games that was kind of St. John's' bread and butter, to struggle on the offensive end in the second half, to get a good lead and then have it dwindle away. The exact opposite happened tonight, where your opposition was the one that really struggled. Your offense, again, wasn't terrific, but was just good enough to get the win. And again, this is something that I keep harping on and coming back to it. 11.5-point spread was way too much for me in this game for St. John's. I know Seton Hall just lost to Butler, upset Saturday at the Prudential Center, but they played UConn very tough. They came back against Creighton. They've had a really impressive regular season to date still. I know the Butler game is the Butler game, but you felt like that they were completely discrediting what Seton Hall had done up until this point. And I got to tell you, from the looks of it, I thought, Seton Hall wanted it more to start. Again, I just thought they were playing like the team that needed the win. St. John's needed the win as well. I mean, I don't want to say St. John's, you could give this one up, especially losing by how much it looked like they were going to lose to Seton Hall. Now, if it was a little bit of a closer game, okay, maybe that won't hurt you in the long run. But if it would have continued going downhill, down 15, and St. John's not even made it close, that could have come back to hurt them, especially if Seton Hall wouldn't get on a roll. Now, at the end of this night, you look at it in the reverse, you say, man, thank God St. John's was able to pull that one out. One other thing, too, for the Johnnies, man, it was a hell of a crowd there at Madison Square Garden. You could feel it through the TV. It was an awesome atmosphere at the Garden, a quiet St. John's atmosphere in the first half, and quiet for good reason because of how porous they were playing on the offensive end and how good Seton Hall was, where they had a ton of momentum going their way. And fortunately for St. John's, they were able to turn the tide in the second half. Zuby was quiet tonight. I mean, they tried playing through him. It was clear that Seton Hall was saying, you know what, Shaheen Holloway, we're doubling the ball. We're doubling every time they go inside to 24. Zuby had 9 points, 4 rebounds, 4 personal fouls, had that technical. I talked about it earlier. And it's kind of crazy to see that out of Zuby. I mean, not known as really a mean guy or anything like that, but had a moment there where he showed some tenacity and some toughness, albeit I don't know if he got him on the lip coming down, and that's where, Zuby really took it to him. But, obviously it may have been calculated too. May have been one of those situations where that's going to be a tough, gritty team. I need to show my guys we need to be tough and gritty tonight. I'm going to have this moment. And fortunately, they both got called for techs. And so it didn't end up coming back to hurting St. John's in the offensive end. Although I will tell you, that moment thankfully didn't hurt St. John's completely, because I could sit here and say, man, that woke up Seton Hall. Maybe don't do that if you're Zuby Ejiofor. But didn't obviously end up coming back to hurting St. John's in the end run. Now, what's next? St. John's, after this win on a 5-game heater, 5-game win streak, and kind of poetic that they win tonight the way they did, which was kind of, if they lost it, resembling the way they lost to Providence a little bit in terms of how they played offensively, the Johnnies. So after this nice 5-game win streak, you hope it turns into 6, as St. John's will hit the road to take on Xavier at the Cintas Center. That'll be coming up this weekend on Saturday. Should be a good atmosphere in Cincinnati. Xavier's the kind of team that you don't want to have a letdown against. They could be a sneaky team. You never really know what you're going to get out of them, especially with Richard Pitino and Rick, obviously father-son going at it. Could be one of those defensive, hard-nosed games, but hopefully it's going to be one of those games where St. John's ultimately comes away with the W. A 65-60 Big East Classic. And I got to tell you, I'm going to date myself here. I obviously wasn't around too much for the old Big East. I wasn't around at all for the 80s and 90s in the Big East, of course. But this felt like, from what everyone has told me and told my peers at St. John's, going to Big East tournament games, this was an old-fashioned Big East game. Nothing sexy, nothing, terrific shooting from the outside, nothing like that. Rough and tumble, inside, classic, hard-nosed Northeast basketball, whichever way you want to draw it up and call it, that's what it felt like, and that's what it was. A really fun game at the Garden that I probably wouldn't be sitting here saying was a really fun game had St. John's lost it, but they end up fortunately coming out on the winning end. And again, you got to give him his flowers for when he made that play. Dylan Darling, probably the play of the night. I would argue the play of the night. Dylan Darling, Dillon Mitchell, the Dillons coming through. Ruben Prey with the big game. Bryce Hopkins, would like to see him be, I think, exert himself a little bit more, take more command inside. He had a couple looks, couple nice moves, just couldn't finish. Simply just couldn't finish at all. And as I'm rounding up my thoughts here, Ian Jackson, after a fantastic game against Villanova, didn't have it tonight. Isaiah Sellers, didn't really have it tonight either, just 6 points. Ian Jackson, though, a big goose egg. Going to need to see more out of him, especially as we continue to push forward, because played so well against Villanova. They got him good looks. It was something that Seton Hall didn't allow St. John's to do. They ran them off the three-point line. They did a fantastic job defending the outside shot, making St. John's have to go inside, and then again collapsing on the inside. And something that I think if you're St. John's, next time you see Seton Hall, you're going to want to be prepared, which that next game against Seton Hall is going to be a good, really good game. That's going to be one, especially if Seton Hall gets it together a little bit and they're desperate. That could be a really fun game as well. But thanks, everyone, for tuning in to our live coverage. Once again, brought to you by Home Field Apparel, Big East Energy, pairing up with Home Field Apparel. Go check it out. A lot of really nice stuff there. Good St. John's gear, a lot of classic throwback St. John's gear. So go check them out. I would encourage everyone to do so, as I will for sure be in these next couple weeks. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. And as always, we'll talk to you next time.